A New York Times columnist calls for Border Patrol agents to be doxxed and called out and shunned from polite society for simply doing their jobs. I'm going to rant about that on today's episode of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
So I'm in Washington, D.C. today, and I am getting my visa for my trip to Afghanistan, which is coming up here in a few weeks. It's pretty difficult to do. Getting a visa for Afghanistan is not as hard as other countries I'm planning to visit. For Afghanistan, you have to send in a packet of materials, including passport, previous visas, letter of recommendation, travel orders for the military embed I'm doing, all sorts of things like that. And the difficulty is, being that I live in Panama, they want me to send my passport in as well and be without my passport for 2 weeks. Well, sending my passport out of Panama kind of strands me and makes it so that I can't really do my job, can't do any travel in that time period. And it's really hard to get anything sent to you in Panama. I can mail things out, but it's harder to get things mailed back. And so what I did was I mailed copies of my passport out and got the visa approved, and then I had to make a trip to Washington, D.C. in order to go take my passport in and have the visa affixed to it. That is turning out to be fairly smooth. We're hoping, I'm praying. So far, so good. It looks like I'm going to have my visa for Afghanistan by about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Getting my visa for Nigeria is a whole different story. It doesn't matter where you live in the Western Hemisphere. If you want to get a visa to go to Nigeria, you have to physically come to the United States, go to Washington, D.C., go to the consulate or their visa section, whatever, and get your biometrics taken. Okay, so you have to spend thousands of dollars to go to the United States, and that's assuming you can get into the United States. There's no mailing your passport or anything like that. And you have to turn your passport into the Nigerian embassy, and it takes at least 2 weeks for your passport to come back to you. So theoretically, if you're a businessman or something in Argentina, you've got to come to Washington, D.C., surrender your passport, wait 2 weeks, sitting here doing nothing, unable to travel, and in hopes that you'll get your passport back with a visa in it for Nigeria. Now, there is a way that they told me, because I can't do that. I mean, I can't surrender my passport for 2 weeks for anything. And there is a way, apparently, to get a visa on arrival in Nigeria, but you're not guaranteed to get it. It takes a tremendous amount of paperwork and pre-planning. And that's what I'm going to try to do, because I can't turn my passport in here anyway. So I've just got to have to, play it by ear, keep my fingers crossed, and hope I can get that Nigerian embassy, that Nigerian visa. If I cannot, and I show up in Nigeria without it, I'm not sure what happens at that point. Maybe I'll just take a nice vacation to Togo or someplace where I can get in without a visa. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about immigration, and the reason is it kind of makes me furious when I see articles like the one I saw this morning in the New York Times, which was calling essentially for the doxing of Border Patrol agents and ICE agents. This is extremely irresponsible. It's certainly not journalism. This journalist for the New York Times writing an op-ed piece and saying that they should dox Border Patrol agents, that they should call them out, that they should be publicly shunned. Let me just tell you what our Border Patrol agents have to deal with down on the border. First of all, the things that you're hearing about family separations, okay? That's not really happening anymore. There are children in migrant detention centers who are coming across the border without their parents. That means that their parents have voluntarily separated from their children. and have surrendered their children to the care of criminal gangs who then smuggle them to the United States and throw them across the border. When they get to the United States, they're picked up by the Border Patrol and they're taken to one of several facilities. Initially, one of the big facilities is in Clint, Texas, where they are put into a detention facility. Now, this is a little bit like a jail. They're not cages, so to speak. I guess that's a semantic difference, but the bottom line is these kids are getting hot showers, 3 hot meals a day. They're getting unlimited snacks, pudding cups, things like that. They're getting to watch cartoons on television, play soccer in a converted Sally Port. They're given medical care, all things that really, in reality, other than the fact that they're not allowed to leave the facility, they're not locked in cells. The cells that they are living in are open. They can come and go as they please, but they can't leave the facility, obviously. And that facility was designed to hold them for something like 8 to 12 hours. Unfortunately, because we're so overwhelmed at the border, they are being held now for 6 to 10 days, and then they're being shipped to another facility or some kind of children's home or something like that. I've been to one of the more long-term facilities that they put these kids in at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And it's the exact same barracks that basic trainees go to when they join the Army. I know that because I went to basic training in a barracks building very similar, actually exactly similar, to the one that they're putting these kids into. When I went to basic training back in the 1980s, they're called starships, and they have 4 barracks wings, kind of centered around a central courtyard with a chow hall in the middle and that sort of thing. And I got to tour one of these facilities. It was a real surreal tour because this was back during the Obama administration. They won't let you bring any kind of electronic recording devices, no cameras, no cell phones, no nothing. I don't even think you might be able to bring a pad and a pencil, but that's about it. You're not allowed to talk to the kids at all. When I was there, I was able to eavesdrop on some of the kids, and they were doing fine. They were allowed phone calls back home. They're getting hot showers for the first time in their lives. They're getting 3 hot meals a day. Again, they're getting playtime, their medical care, all things that you have to understand the way these kids, the place that they came from, while I wouldn't call it a third world country, certainly came from a poor background in Latin America. If you go to Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, anywhere like that, what you're going to find is that people live in sometimes concrete floors in their homes, maybe even dirt floors in their homes. They likely don't have hot water in their homes, but I mean, do you really need it in Latin America? They have to pay for their schooling. They have to pay for any medical care they receive. If they're coming because the conditions are as bad as people say they are, then the fact that they're getting 3 hot meals a day in the detention facility. Look, the Border Patrol is spending $4,000 a day on snacks and food for the kids that are in just that facility in Clinton, Texas. So these kids are not being mistreated. The facilities are clean. They're safe, and probably safer, far safer, without a doubt, than the kids have been experiencing on their journey north from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And their parents are sending them because they trust that they will be taken better care of in the United States than they would staying in Guatemala. That's all there is to it. And so right now, 50% of Border Patrol agents are spending their time caring for migrants in detention facilities, moving them around from one place to another, watching over them, whatever, processing them, that sort of thing. They're not able to be out on the border, securing the border, because they're taking care of these migrants. And so when you hear presidential candidates, politicians, and activists talk about how badly these migrants are being treated, you really need to take that with a grain of salt, because they're not being treated badly. They're being treated probably better than they've been treated at any time in their life. The expectation that they would be immediately released into the United States would only cause an even greater flood of migrants to show up. And in reality, you have to understand that's what these politicians want. That's what these activists want. We've had guests on from the Center for Immigration Studies that have talked about apportionment. It doesn't matter if these migrants are able to vote or not, because in reality they do have a vote just by their presence in the United States. When they take the census next year in 2020, they will apportion the House of Representatives, our congressmen, by the number of people in each district. And by and large, these sanctuary cities are all blue districts in the United States. And that means that they could pick up between 4 and 9 seats in the House without having an election, just because of the number of migrants that are in the United States. And that's why they're trying to pack them in as fast as they can. They're doing everything they can to stop the Trump administration from putting the brakes on this unchecked migration. Now, in reality, the hard stance that Trump has taken with Mexico is paying off. We saw 144,000 migrants in May, and in June that dropped to about 89,000 migrants. That's still a mind-numbing number of migrants. That's still an incredible number of migrants, but it is down sharply from the month of May, and I'm hoping it'll be down again in the month of July. There have already been 9 migrants that have died drowning in the Rio Grande this year. And I've shown you on this podcast where Border Patrol agents are putting their lives on the line to go out and rescue these people that keep trying to swim across the Rio Grande River, where the currents are bad and it's easy to drown. They're coming across on tiny little, beach balls or inner tubes or things like that. And the Border Patrol agents are going out and rescuing these people one after the other, after the other, after the other. The Border Patrol also has a special unit that does nothing but rescue migrants out of the desert to keep them from dying. In reality, we are spending millions of dollars a year and doing absolutely everything that we physically can do to keep migrants from dying in our custody, dying in our care. The reason that they are continue to die is because they keep coming across that forbidding desert and trying to swim across the Rio Grande River. That's on them, it's not on us. And in reality, you could say it's on the Democrats in Congress for encouraging that kind of migration. Now, Jesse Jackson, they call him Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm not going to profane the term Reverend by applying it to Jesse Jackson. But his Rainbow Push Coalition is planning marches along the border now. And they're trying to raise money and supplies to give to these migrants in toothbrushes and toothpaste and sanitary. You know what? That's fantastic. Knock yourselves out. But doxing Border Patrol agents who are already putting themselves at risk. They're at risk of diseases that are coming into the United States, and they're at risk of violence along the border. And so for them to be attacked in their own home country for serving the country that they love is an absolute profanity. And it ought to be stopped, it ought to be called out, and it ought to be prosecuted where possible. Now, one other thing that happened that you're just not seeing in the news, on Sunday night or Monday morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning in El Paso, Texas, the border crossing going into Juarez, there were several hundred migrants who tried to charge the border, and come across illegally at the port of entry. Border Patrol agents have the protocols for that sort of thing. They were able to quickly shut the border down and keep those people from coming across. But the reason that happened, I would say, is because these migrants are angry that they're being told to stay in Mexico and wait for their asylum hearings over there. And they have been sold the lie by the Democrats in Congress and by the politicians and activists that they can come across with no problem into the United States and live here for at least several years until they get an asylum hearing. And what they're finding when they get to the border is that we're working with Mexico to make them stay inside Mexico, and they're getting angry and they're getting frustrated. And so look to see more of this kind of violence, more of these kind of protests along the border. And boy, you got to pray for those Border Patrol agents. They're having to face protests now from both sides of the border, activists on the north side and migrants on the south side. And that's just not a good thing. So thanks for watching the podcast today. I hope you'll stick around. I am traveling this week. I've got some personal things to do, and I'll try to share more about that with you later. But keep watching. We've got a lot of good stuff for you. I'm Chuck Holton. You've been watching The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.